Shalom and welcome to another edition of our Daily Bread on Messianic Torah. And this week's Parashat is Chayei. It's the fifth Parashat of the book of Bereshit, also called Genesis. And this week's Parashat starts back in Bereshit, or Genesis 23:1 through 25:18, with the Haftorah in 1 Kings, or Aleph Melech, 1 through 31. And my message for 2024, 23-24 is called The Marriage of Your Desire. So in this week's parashah, we start off with, obviously it's called Sarah's life, and what it ends up being is about Sarah's death. And Abraham's looking for a burial place for her. And then also later in this parashah, Abraham dies, and we have the searching for a wife for Yitzhak. And then we also have a mention of Ishmael's death. And even all the way in the Haftorah, we have the story of Shlomo and the death of King David. And so, a lot of death right here. It's not, it's kind of a dark overtone here, which brings us to the first point. This idea of Sarah, of his wife, and what does it mean? What does it mean? What is the role? I always like to boil things down to their core parts because you can get some really great lessons there. What does it mean for him to have a wife? How does that relate to the whole story of Avraham? And I think you're going to see some connections in here. And then what is this about, her death, and then trying to find a place to bury her, and then also not taking the cave for free? What are all these things, what are some potential meanings from it? And so the first thing that we talk about is the idea of wife, right? A husband and wife, the two become one. So even when we think about death, we really, in the title, it says it. It's life, but it's her death. So when we think about someone's life, a lot of times at the end of their life is when we start to think about, it's really at their death that we think about their whole life. We also think about our own life. So as it says, there's wisdom in the house of mourning. And one of the reasons that is because when you go to a funeral, when somebody that you love passes away, it's kind of like the end of the book. It's like now you think of the totality of all your memories, all the time, everything at the point of death, all the way back from and their whole birth, that is now encapsulated. So many times in life what we do is we look at today. We look at the moment. Maybe your wife, is 40 years old. And so you see her at that. Maybe you met her at 30. Okay, so you kind of know her from 30 to 40. Now it's been 10 years. Let's say you've been married 10 years. And that really becomes kind of the associated memory with your wife. You don't know her at 20 or at 15 or when she was a toddler. You just don't know a lot of that stuff. And so everybody on the planet is dealing with life in the same way, right? We meet people and we cross paths, right? We cross paths with people, but we're only seeing a sliver of the totality of their life, whereas God sees the whole start all the way to the finish, and he knows that whole story. We only get a glimpse of that a lot of times when somebody dies. When somebody dies, we go, okay, well, if they died at 46, well then, now we know, like God always knew, that from the time they were born, they were going to live 46 years, and then that was going to be it. And here's all the things that they did. Here's all the things that they learned. Here's all the choices that they made. Here's all the people they interacted with. Here was their life representing all their choices and interactions in a totality, which you recognize at their death. And so that's so important because many times the wisdom comes when somebody's still alive, but then recognizes the totality of that person's life, right? When it's over, they look at the totality of it. They look at all their memories and they look at beyond that because now they're really thinking, holistically in a larger scale and a larger scope about the whole life of that person. And it's really an opening of the eyes. We study the Torah and we read about these people's lives. We get to look at Avraham, and we can look at when the first story was starting to talk about him leaving his country, all the things that happened all the way up until we get to the death. We have that godly view, that overview of start to finish. We don't do that very well with ourselves. We don't do that very well while we're living. And wouldn't it be a blessing if we understood the totality of a situation, of a person? There's lessons that are learned there. And if you learn from the people who went before us that are in the Torah that we're reading about, while we're still alive, we can apply those principles. We can learn from the people who made mistakes. We can learn from the people who were righteous. And we can go out and take that information and apply it while we're still alive. And I think that's one of the big lessons that we see here. We're just talking about the title. Hi, Sarah. Sarah's life, which then goes into Sarah's death. Right? Life and death. Right? Like Moshe said, I set before you life and death, good and evil. Right? Choose good. Choose life. It's a choice. Our choices are represented by life, and they produce fruit of good and evil. So now let's get back to this idea of the two becoming one. So you have Sarah, you have Avraham's wife, and the two became one, right? And they had Yitzhak, right? You look at their whole life, getting married, all this and that. And it's very interesting because in last week's Parashat, we were reading at the end, you get the genealogies, and you get all the way down to Rivka. Rivka is mentioned as one of the children. And then last week, I was telling my kids, well, that's important to know because I'm like, who's Rivka? Rivka's ultimately in the next Parashat going to become the wife of Yitzhak. And so again, we see from a little hint in last week's Parashat, that's looking backwards, and then zooming forward and understanding the connection between why was that important in last week's Parashat to where does then Rivka enter the scene at the well, right? Because when that servant's going to go back and he says, don't take somebody from the Canaanim, but take someone from my own kindred, my own country. So he's sending him back. And so that little tidbit of information that we got about Rivka being born, well, it's going to pop back up here. And this again goes to that godly view, is that you can't be so zoomed in that you can't see the path, the direct, right? The way, as they say. So, as Moshe said, if I have found favor in your sight, show me now the way. Show me that path, right? That start to the beginning and the end, the Aleph and the Tav. Very important. And of course, that's symbolic of Mashiach. So there's a lot to unpack in that. So we have to get our minds right and think about things a little bit differently. Now let's go to the point here is that Sarah is Avram's wife, and the two became one. And what happens when man and woman come together, the two become one, new life is created. And the new life is a combination. The new life represents two things. Number one, the combination of the man and the woman, right? They're literally combined. Oh, he's got my eyes, he's got your nose, combined into one being. So it's the regathering, which is, of course, Messianic. The regathering of Israel in this sense. And it's also from the beginning that Hava was created, Eve, right? From the rib of Adam. And so already resided, was already one, already part of Adam. Two, right? We're already one. So we get a little foreshadow there. And then separated, right? And then we have what happened, what went down in the beginning with the serpent. And we're going to get to that. And really, we're trying to fix what happened with the serpent, right? And so there was a separation. And woman represents the desire, right, at its core. A woman represents the desire of man. right? This is flesh of my flesh, bone of my bones, right? I mean, Adam looked on a woman and she was pleasing. As a matter of fact, it says that a man, leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, right? That's a desire. There's a draw there. And so what we're going to learn, though, is that there's good desires and there's bad desires. And if woman represents the heart of man, which I believe she was pulled out of man in order for him to get to know himself, right? It says the two become one. Therefore, if there is some issue, and it says, a man's heart, who can know it, right? This is part of what we're trying to do when it talks about he'll write the law on their inward parts, right? Like the heart. Then what does that mean? It's like his desire. And so it's a big thing. I'm not going to unpack all of it right now, but the point is that this relationship of man and woman, which is the start of Chayei Sarah, a man's wife, is so important to understand. So many people, they rush in and they want to read a few verses and stay on the surface level, but they don't understand the mechanics and the function of creation, of what is. What are you actually looking at? Because if you're looking at just the surface level details and they're just like, oh, okay, Sarah died, okay, moving on, there's nothing there. And it's like, there's a lot there. You could spend hours and days and years on understanding even the most basic verses in the scriptures. These things, just like the complexity of the universe, are very broad, deep, and connected. And so you could spend your whole life and still not even scratch the surface. So don't be lazy when it comes to your study. Don't be so eager to move on to sentence number 2, just gobbling them up, gobble, 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 and not actually chewing, right? A clean animal chews the cut. Divided hoof rightly divides the truth. Chews it, brings it back up. Chews it, puts it back down, brings it back up, presses upon it, dividing it. It's an important thing because that's what a clean animal. So a good Torah student is the model of a clean animal. So we need to chew on these things and we need to understand them. Otherwise, you're going to end up like the people when Messiah came and he spoke in parables. Oh, this is a parable of the wheat and the tares. Thousands of people hear this parable. And what did they think it meant? Because only his disciples drew near to him afterwards, and it was declared to them, oh, actually, the wheat are the children of God, the tares are the children of the devil, the reapers, and he explains what all that is. But what did the other thousands of people just think it was a story about agriculture? About farming? If that's all they got, they didn't get anything, right? They missed it. Now, imagine that the Word of God is the same way. We're reading stories. And if all you get is that surface level, you don't understand what the meanings are, what the functions are, what the, I call remez, right? That's the spiritual definitions that underline the physical, the peshat, the surface level. If you don't understand those things, I don't know what you're getting. I think people for hundreds of years have gotten a lot of nothingness, a lot of very surface level. They're walking around arguing about agricultural stories. They're arguing about the surface level of the scriptures, and they don't understand the depth of them, and they don't understand what's really going on. So back to marriage. His wife, that's what this is about. And this is how I teach my kids how to write a message on the Torah. I said, you got to understand what's happening right here. Sarah dies. The reflexive idea there, Sarah's alive. So life versus death. Okay? Life versus death. Cool. What Sarah represents? She's the wife of Avraham. So now it's a story about Avraham and the relationship he had with his wife, and now she's dead. And if she's his heart, his desire, right? And now, so then you just kind of theorize, theory. It's like a good observation, like a good scientist. Don't try and figure out the meanings. Just hypothesize. Okay, if this is this, let's put it on the table. Let's make observations. If this is on this, then what would this mean? Okay, cool. Let's see that. Let's put that out. What's that look like? Oh, that doesn't work. Okay, well, maybe that's not it. Dig deeper. Okay, what is it? answer, that's how you solve the equation, right? Imagine the people who heard the parable of the wheat and the tares. They could have imagined, wait, what if this isn't just about wheat and tares? What if this has other meaning? What might the wheat be? Maybe the wheat are the wicked ones. Plug that in. Does that work out? Does God save the wicked ones and bring them to him at the end and get rid of the good ones? That doesn't seem like that works. What if there's something else? What if they're, you plug in things if you don't know, just like algebra. You can just guess if you don't know the formula. That's okay. Keep plugging in things enough numbers into X. You might find the answer that way. It's a slow road, but you might figure it out. So we have Sarah, the wife. The two became one. And now his desires, right? His desires, the whole totality of their relationship, right, now has come to an end. So what does that mean? Does his desires die? I don't know. I started thinking about that, and I thought, it reminds me of what King Shlomo said, right, about everything being vanity, right? He had riches, he had women, he had power, he had everything, right? These are his desires. These are most people's desires in life. He had it all and counted it all now at the end as nothing. Okay? So that's kind of a model, a pattern. Oh, all the desires of man end up being nothing. And so we kind of see that pattern here with the death of Sarah. So now he's looking for a place to lay her to rest. Okay? So even after she's dead, the interesting observation here is that after his life is still going on, right? He's alive, but his wife died. And so he has to carry on. He's got responsibility. What do I do? Where do I lay her to rest? There's going to be mourning. There's going to be all of this, right? It's not just about, somebody died. That might be the end for them, but it's not the end for them in a sense of all the people who loved him and the people they were connected with and all of that. They're still carried on in those people's memories. There's mourning. There's all these other things that happen. So that's an interesting thing too. And so he's going to get this field. And Ephron offers to give it to him, and he refuses. And that's a big point right there. Why? Because a gift can be given, and then there's almost an imputed, like, I owe you something. And we can see with Avraham that when the king of Sodom tried to say, hey, take the spoil, all this, and he said, nope, I'm not taking anything because I don't want you saying you made me rich, right? His riches come from God, from Elohim. So we already know this about Avraham, which is weird because most people be like, I would take it. Oh, someone's giving you something free, going to give you some riches? Boy, I'll take it. I'll tell you what, that's the problem with our society today, right? Look at all the things in the world, politics, all the rulers, all unjust judges. So they're breaking the 10th commandment about coveting, which at its core biblically is actually altering your judgment for gain. So in other words, they're willing to take unjust gain. They're willing to be bribed and be manipulated for somebody else's power trip. And that's part of a big problem in our world today. So you can see Avraham was quite a bit different. He wasn't looking to accept something from anybody else. He wanted to own his own, right? The field. He wanted to own it because then it belongs to him. There's a unique relationship with that field that if someone gives it to you, now you have two people who kind of have ownership or say in some weird way with the possession of Avraham. So he doesn't really possess it if he takes it as a gift. Now, think about that in relationship to his wife. In the Bible, the woman, right? A woman is to be one man's, right? Even there's laws concerning the fact that if she gets divorced and then goes and is another man's wife, she can't go back, her husband, and then she gets divorced again. She can't come back to the original husband. You can't do it, right? Because there's no sharing, okay? A wife is to have one husband, okay? And so this is important because it's the same thing. right? It's about singular ownership and authority, right? You can't have two authorities. It says a house divided will not stand, right? It says a man can't serve two masters. Okay, you can't do that, right? You have to have one source of authority over you. And if we go back to the beginning, right, of Adam and Hava, what do you get? You have the serpent coming in and talking to another man's wife, right? And telling her and teaching her and telling her what to do. Well, before that, her husband told her what to do. And who told her husband what to do? God told her husband, and the husband told the wife. And then the wife would tell the children and teach the children. That's how the proper order goes of authority. It has a structure. Well, here comes in a stranger, the serpent, and starts to tell another man's wife what to do. And if she listened, that's like a form of adultery. Because now she's serving two masters, right? And that was the start of the downfall. And we know this because, well, there's multiple things in that story. The first is it says, her desire shall be to her husband. And some of you, oh, she just desired him? No, that's a desire to rule over. We know that also by reflexive thought because the second half of that sentence says, but, so this would be the opposite. So here's one force coming in, there's a counter force. It says, her desires to her husband, but he shall rule over her. Right? So that wouldn't make sense if it was, oh, she loved her husband, but he's going to rule. That doesn't work out that way. It's because it's the desire to rule over. And we get the second kind of witness on that, where God's handing out the punishments for what happened. And what he said to Adam is he said, because you listened to your wife. And then he gave him his punishment, right? I mean, that's pretty clear. Like everything in the scripture matters. There's no like little half sentence that didn't matter. Every set of word matters, especially the words that come as a quote directly out of the mouth of God. So you got to pay attention to them and you got to understand that. And so that whole thing got messed up in the garden because Hava shouldn't have listened to someone besides her husband. And then it says, and then she ate. Now she's listening to the serpent. And then she gives it to her husband. The husband shouldn't be taking the direction and leadership of his wife, who is then sinning and taking the leadership and direction of the serpent. And then when he eats, he's no longer following God either. So you can see what happened. There's 4 layers here. There was God telling Adam not to eat from the tree, who told his wife not to eat from it, and the serpent, who's the serpent, comes in. Now all of a sudden, the serpent flips over. The serpent gives instruction. Now he's the high authority, giving instruction to the woman. She's second in command, and she gives it to her husband. He's third in command, and God is the lowliest. Nobody's listening to God. There's a structure and there's an authority. And the beginning of the fall of mankind happened when you flipped that power structure over. Okay? So what happened? Adam listened to his wife represent his desire. What did she do? The serpent's over there, oh, and she's like, oh, well, as I saw it was good for food. It's not good for food, it's poison. God said you would die when you... So that's not true. That's not a true statement. Oh, it'd make you wise. No, it actually makes you unwise. It's unwise to disobey your husband and disobey God. Why would you do that? Especially, he said the penalty of it was death. So why would you test that? Why would you want... That's not wisdom. Wisdom would be obeying and listening to God. Even if you didn't know. Even if it looked wonderful. Even if it seemed like all these things. Wisdom would have been to still say, nope, God said don't do it. So there was no wisdom. It wasn't good for food. None of that was true. Right? It's always opposites with the devil. The serpent's always opposite. We see it in our world today. Everything's opposites. And they tell you everything's great. Everything's fine. Oh, the economy's wonderful. It's so good. I don't know anyone who thinks that. Nobody thinks that. Nobody's doing better. Nobody's having a great time except for probably like super ultra rich people. You know what I mean? I don't know it, but they always sit there and tell you when you're starving, oh no, everything's great. You're not hungry at all. That's not true. So you always got to watch for a flip, a reverse, because we're dealing with good and evil here, light and darkness. They're opposites. Okay? So, and then if you know that the bad guys, the dark side, are liars. Yeah? It says the devil comes as a messenger of light. But I thought he was darkness. He is. He's darkness pretending to be light. Right? Things the opposite. Here, take this medicine. It's good for you. Really, it's poison. Here's all the side effects. That's opposites. It's opposites. You know, it's literally the wolf in sheep's clothing. It's not just a wolf, because you see a wolf, you say, hey, that's bad. No, don't do that. It's the wolf that's saying, no, this is great. This is wonderful. Right? And most sins are connected to desire. But when you look at the outcomes of those desires, they're not good. You know? Cain was angry. What was the output of that? He killed his brother. What was the output of that? Did he get approval from God? No, he got cast out and cursed. You know? You Esau and Yaakov. Esau was hungry, right? And he didn't value his birthright. Sold it away. Afterwards, was that a good thing? No, then he hated it. It says he despised his birthright after that. So it's like, okay, when you steal something, you know, the scriptures talk about the thief who's caught, right? When you're stealing it, when you're doing the wrong thing and you're getting away with it, you know, you're getting the reward. But always that's bad. It's always, you know, fruit of the poison tree. That's how it is. That's what a serpent does. It poisons. It's not the bite that kills you. It's the poison. It's the second thing that gets you, right? And so if we look at this, and we look at Adam and Hava, and we say, okay, you know, it might feel good, but it ended up being bad. And now we're on this long path to fix what started with Hava, right? Because she was wrong. She had it wrong. She should have just called over her husband and said, hey, the serpent's trying to talk to me. And the husband come over and kill the serpent. Problem solved. Right? Don't talk to my wife. Because the serpent was trying to get him to disobey God. Disobey God equals death. So the serpent was trying to kill his wife. And his response as a man should have been to kill that serpent. You're trying to kill my wife. I'm the protector. I'm going to kill the serpent. Right? Problem solved. Right? And so that's what are we trying to do throughout this whole timeline in history now? We move forward, straightforward. What do you have? You know, you have a situation where you have weak men. Right? That's where our society is right now. Weak men. Hateful women. Right? It talks about that as a reason for earthquakes. Right? When the hateful woman is married, right? And you can just go on to any social media channels and see, you know, people melting down, people all that. It's a destruction of the order of God, and so it's an unhealthy desire on both parties, right? It was unhealthy for Hava to try and rule over her husband and be in charge because that's not what she was given. Same way, double meaning. They weren't given to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and then they did anyway. It wasn't given to them. They took it, and it ended up being bad for them. Okay, and the thing that they said, okay, we're going to put them out there, and we got to put the flaming sword because we don't want them to take of the tree of life and live forever. Right? So there's a good thing. It was waiting for them. They were restricted from a good thing, and they took the bad thing. So this is about your desire. So he says no. He wants to own. Abraham wanted to own his own things. And it's a place for his wife, his heart, his desire. He needs to make sure his desire, he needs to make sure it's right, that it's 100% his. How many people are moved around by all these different desires in the world, right? There's all these types of desires out there. There are a lot of bad desires out there. Pornography, it's all making men weak, right? Chasing riches, unjust gain. It could be all kinds of things that distract you from the things that you should be doing, distract you from the good things in life. And this is what, from the Torah, this is what, Paro said. He said, let them make bricks without straw. Let's make them spend so much time being poor and working, they don't have time to think about God. Right? So don't let your Torah study suffer. Don't let that happen. Whether things are tough or things aren't, or things are great, either one. When they've eaten, they're full, they'll forget me. No? Blessing could be a problem. Being in want could be a problem. You have to keep certain things consistent in your life no matter what's going on. So the last point here is we see Rivka goes out, and his servant of Avraham goes to find the special wife for Yitzhak. So here's the promised child from God, the son that God, it says, gave him, right? Your only son I gave you, right? This is Yitzhak. Now, his wife, his heart, his desires, right? I said there's good desires and bad desires. So now the servant's going and asking Elohim, please let the woman who he asked for water, who not only gives him water, but also offers to water the camels, be the one. Now there's a couple things that are interesting here. The first is that God is going to show what God, right, says is a good woman. So Avraham already knew what he didn't want for his son. But now God's going to show the one, what's the good, righteous, and Yitzhak in that sense is kind of a model, right, for Mashiach. And God's going to choose a bride, and who is going to be good for him? What's the good example of a good, godly woman that should be joined, become one? What are the good desires that Yitzhak should have? And that's represented in Rivka. And Rivka's an interesting story. There's two things here. Number one, she's going to serve the servant, right, who is also the representative, not only for Avraham, but for Yitzhak. So if she serves him, then she would serve her husband, right? If she's gracious and kind to the servant, and the same that you do to the servant, you did to the one who sent the servant. Now, it's the same thing they did to the Messiah, they were doing to God. And when Moshe said, Moshe and Aharon, who are we, right? You're not battling against us, you're battling against God. Right? That's paraphrased. But So here we go. She's willing to serve the servant, which, by the way, the husband is the servant, right, in the relationship. He's providing for, protecting, doing all that. That's not like, I hear it so many times, women are like, oh, sure, you like to be in charge. It's a more difficult job. Yeah, it's like an entrepreneur, being the business owner versus being an employee. I would love to just show up, clock in, just do my job, not have to worry about every problem that there is in the entire thing and be responsible for everything. It's a difficult job. And so don't diminish that, And that's the problem. What our society's running into this problem now is that men don't know what it means to be godly men. And women don't know what it means to be godly women, to be fair. But the role of a man, this is the destruction, right? It started, probably back in the 50s. I mean, it started before that, but let's just say formally it's an attack on the family, right? Because things were much better 50 years ago, much, much better 70 years ago, as far as family structure and everything goes. And so the rapid decline in our world can be mapped right out and correlated with the decline in the family and the roles of the family. And the kids are more rebellious and off the charts now, as are the wives, and the husbands aren't doing their job, right? It's just all, beta males and contentious women and just rebellious kids. Like, this is not what success looks like. And the more it gets away from what God established, the worse it becomes, the worse society becomes. And so you want to be able to resolve that, bring that back to the proper roles. Because when it's just like the body, when the body is imbalanced, that's where disease comes in. There's a problem with God's creation. And when it's in balance and it has all the nutrients it needs, and it has the exercise and the sun it needs, and the love that it needs, and all these different things, then it's a pretty great, it's health. Health is wealth. And the same thing goes in your families and in your roles. Excuse me. There's healthy roles and unhealthy roles. And I think our society is very sick when it comes to those things. So we have Rivka, who not only serves the servant, but then serves the camels. And that to me is just like a woman who serves her husband and serves his children, right? That's what a godly woman does. I mean, you can read about it in Proverbs, and she wakes up and she takes care of the family and she does all these things. And then there's a godly man too, and he has a lot of responsibilities and roles too. And the woman is there to support, right? If she represents the desires, if the desires are bad, which then says if the woman is bad, right, which goes back to Adam and Hava, then the man who doesn't rule over the bad desires, then the whole marriage is going to be a problem. And then the kids will also be a problem. And then when you compound that over 8 billion people in society, you can see exactly why there's problems in our world. Because that little problemed framework, right, what's going on, where everybody's not doing their roles, then you just multiply that and magnify it, and now you see in society the problems that we have is what that looks like when you magnify it by 8 billion. And so one of the great things that you can do is do that, and you can see people doing that. Men are starting to learn again how to be men, and women, trad women, are looking at that and saying, okay, wait, we've drifted far from shore. What's that other life look like? And when you have all that alignment, just like a chiropractor, when you have everybody in their roles, the blessings flow. The kids are happy. The family's happy. The marriages are strong. Everything's good, right? When you get away from that, I don't see too much happiness and success in modern interpretations of relationships and roles. So if you look at Rivka, one of the interesting things I'm going to say about Rivka is if you look at her name, it's Resh, Bet, Kuf, Aleph. Okay? And in the, if you look at a dictionary, it says one thing. The ancient pictographs are that helps you get a little deeper understanding of what that word means, because the relationships between the letters, the Hebrew letters, which are pictures, help you define what the word really means. Not what we think it means in 2024, but what did it actually mean when God used that word, when he created that word. It has a meaning. It's a creation. And we can't just say, oh, a cat's a dog. A cat isn't a dog. A cat is a specific animal and has certain traits and doesn't have other traits of other things. It doesn't have feathers. It's not a bird. And so when we understand creation, right, words, the whole world was created with words. So understanding what words mean and thinking about those words that make up a document of words, which is the scriptures. If you don't think about words, then it's going to be pretty hard to get the meaning out of it. And so if you look at this, Resh in the Hebrew, it's head. And there's some variations of what some people think it means. I've studied it for a long time. I don't agree with all the other scholars on some of the pictographic meanings, but you have to use your own brain. So for me, it's head, Beit is the house, head of the house, right? That's the man. Head of the house. Kuf is a line in the ancient Hebrew with a circle through it, which is like the sun. It's interpreted as the sun, right, going down. Now, at this time, it's the division between day and night, right? Light and dark. And so how I see that is judgment, right? That's to rightly divide light and dark, right? That's having good judgment, is knowing what's good and bad. And then the hay is a window, and that usually means revealed, right? It's what you see. It's like our eyes. It could be a window in a house. And so if you look at Rivka's name in the ancient Hebrew, it would really be head of the house is judgment revealed. And I find this so interesting because if you look at that, and then she represents the desire of Yitzhak, right? The heart of desire, or the desire of Yitzhak, then Rivka, like just that name, it's actually in alignment with the Messiah, which is, he's the head, bigger picture, head of the household, it's judgment revealed, right? That's the Son of God. And so if you then appoint that and say, imagine taking the heart, that to me is very similar to the law written on your hearts, right? What is that right metric? She is the right woman for Yitzhak, the one given by God to the Son of God, given to Avraham by God. So these two becoming one would be Yitzhak, right, with the right heart. That would be the Torah observant. So in the bigger picture, when you look at that, who is the man with the heart of God, right? The right heart, the right desires. That would be Messiah. It would obviously also be all of the righteous people who he said to his disciples, I would that you're one with me as I am one with the Father. So it's not just this thing for Messiah and we're something else and don't worry about it. And so Rivka is a very important thing. And as I was searching into Rivka, it made me think of the godly woman, and then that took me on another path, which was this idea of rubies. Now, the word on ruby, which is also like for pearl, is a word that's used for both wisdom and a godly woman. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because the fourth level, sod, the hidden things, the honey, wisdom, which Shlomo sought after, right, then is then a model also of the godly woman, right? And so if you think about that and say, okay, it says, this is the premier thing, find this first. Now, if the godly woman in this sense isn't just like a wife, but if that's actually the heart, the godly heart, the right desire, right? And then you go back and look at, like we talked about earlier, that a person's life is all about their desires. Was it their desire for work? Every choice they make has some kind of desire attached to it. And so having the right heart, right? And it says, right, he can judge their heart, right? So this goes into a whole nother interesting thing, which is our desire, because that is what all of our choices were from the very beginning to the end. And this goes to what I said about King Shlomo, which is looking at everything going, oh, this is vanity, all these other things, all these wrong desires, right? That was the wrong woman. Those were all vanity. Those were empty. Those were not things that I should have desired. And so he got all the things that everybody else wanted and then counted them as not good, empty. And so the true desire, right, given by God, is obedience to the Torah. And that's what we should be chasing after. And this is a desire that if the desire represents the woman, what should your desires do? Should they tear you down? Should they take you to evil? Should they introduce sin to you? The answer is no. Your desire should, like a godly woman, serve you. Make you a godly man, right? Just like Rivka. Serve you and serve your children. That's what your desire should do. Imagine that. It says that he made the covenant with Avraham because he knew he would diligently teach his children and his children's children after him. That's huge. Everybody's trying to grab onto this Avrahamic covenant. That's what, whether it's Christians, Jews, whatever it is out there, they're all tied back to this promise, this kingdom of heaven, however they define it. But it all will boil back to this Abrahamic covenant, right? And why was it given to him? If it's this thing that is the most important thing for all humanity and all this other, that, and it comes down to the fact that it says it was given to him, all of humanity's promises, the relationship between God and us comes down to the fact that Abraham diligently taught his children and his children's children. That's why all this started. Then that means that that's a pretty important thing, right? And that goes back to then Rivka, right? Serving the servant and serving his animals, right? The godly woman, the godly desire, it not only serves you, which being righteous serves you well, but then you also have to teach your children. You have to serve your children and make sure that they don't lose the love for God and have the right desires, right? And they don't get sucked into the ways of the world and have their desires be off. And so anyway, it's a very interesting thing that we see here with Rivka. Your desires, and we see with marriage and the roles. And so many people are so negative. It's like, you should submit to your husband. Oh, yeah, of course he wants me to submit to him. You got to understand, that is about being his heart. That is about giving him and being for him, just like Rivka, a godly heart that serves and serves his children and makes sure that you support and enable him to be a godly man so that he can not only lead you, follow God's word, but also teach your children so that when you're gone, life, which is the obedience to the Torah, carries on for that generation, and then you teach them to teach their children. And theoretically, that is eternal life. That is life that just continues and continues serving God. So you see the big picture here? The worshiping and serving of God with your choices, offering up the sacrifices of your choices, being godly. Like, explain to me how that is a negative thing. And if that's not for you, if that's such a terrible idea, see, when you understand that it's part of God's plan, if you're just not into God's plan, part of God's plan is to serve your husband and your children as a woman. If that's terrible for you, if you're rebellious to that, if you don't want to do that, right, then that's where the world is. That's where society is. It's pushing all that kind of stuff. Oh, you don't need a man. Oh, you're an independent woman. Okay, you can be either one. There are no shackles. It's only a choice. But those choices have consequences. So if you choose the way of the world and you go, oh, that's cool, I don't want to submit to some man, I don't want to serve my children. I mean, that's what you find in our society. People, there's a lot of cat ladies out there. Why? They don't need no man. They don't want to have children. What are people arguing about? They're arguing about, abortion, and like, you look at what the arguments are in this world. What kind of rulers people want, and what are one side arguing for, and what's another side arguing, for, and you can pretty much categorize that and say, hey, this is just wheat and the tares. Pick a side, and it comes back down, and I think it's so powerful because it's all about those roles. Will men be men? Will women be women? And will children be children? You have the rebellious child, right? And the Torah is put to death. You have the hateful woman, right? A rebellious woman. It says rebellion is the sin of witchcraft. And then third, you got the beta males who are not willing to lead, not willing to accept their role. If nobody accepts their role, you have chaos. And that's a lot of what I see here that we have. So how do you repair that? Accept your role and be amazing at it. Whatever God created you, just like it says, does the pot look to the person who created him and say, why have you made me thus? right? It is an argument with your Creator. It's not an argument with your husband. It's an argument with your Creator. It's not an argument for a man, whether he's going to be a man or not. He's going against what God created him to be. The child who's rebellious to their parents, they're just arguing with the people that God put in charge of them. God made all those choices. Every argument goes up to God. You're not arguing amongst yourselves. That's not how it works. Just like he said, when Aharon and Miriam were complaining to Moshe, he says, why were you not afraid to speak to my servant Moshe? To speak against my servant Moshe? Right? Why were you not afraid to even speak against the person he put in charge? Right? Those are the cold hard facts. So that's my message this year. The marriage of your desire. The goal is to be really married to your desire. I think that's what your whole life is about, is going through the motions of chasing after different desires. And then hopefully wisdom is when those desires are aligned with God's desires, and then you chase after them with all your heart. That is the beautiful woman. That is the wife worthy of being married to. That produces the fruit of righteousness, the children of righteousness, obedience to the Torah. If you love it, if you chase it, if it is your desire, and then it gets rid of all of your other desires, then I think that's what you're here to learn. And I think the wrapper around all of that is, the framework is the roles that you're in. How do you, if you're the woman, how do you be the righteous desire? How do you support your husband and his desires to help him become a more godly man? How do you raise your children to be godly children? And how do you be a godly woman, right? And if you're a child, how do I be a godly child? If you're a man, how do I be a godly husband? How do I be a godly son? How do I be a godly father, right? These are the roles. The roles matter. Don't be so distracted by the things of the world, and don't be caught up and let other people like Ephron, right? Don't be bribed by the desires of the world. You got to learn to tune those out. Own your own desires and make sure that they're good. Hope this is a blessing to you. Till next time, shalom.